My name's Tara. My father said Tara and my mother said Tara, so take your pick. And I am helping the Chinese Canadian Museum write policies and procedures, but I spend most of my days in White Rock, where I work with a private lab called Fraser's Regina. So if you're looking for actual conservation treatments, which I'm not going to talk about today, that's one place you could call, okay? Or you can email me there and I can either talk to you more about it, or we can refer you to someone else. I do teach at UBC. I teach a preservation course at Masters of Library and Archival Science. And I am on the steering committee of the BC Hearn. I mention it because it's an important organization. We're all volunteer conservators, and it's called the Heritage Emergency Response Network. And we're setting up, and we have been setting up pockets of train. We go out and train in small communities on disaster or salvage and response. And then if they should have an emergency or disaster, they can call on people they've met at the workshops to help them out. So I put that up there just because it's a wonderful resource and something we're all very proud of. So what I'd like to do today is, I've already explained to you what's in your boxes, and they're like a little starter kit for preservation of your archives. And I want to start, you know more than I what's in your collections, and you've probably acquired them or been handed down. Maybe you're not generating so much anymore because of electronic issues. We're just acquiring, hopefully. So what I want to do is just tell you the high points, because we have a short amount of time. I'm going to hit the high points about what goes wrong and what we can do about it. But I'm going to do it in the context of I'm envisioning you guys going back to your homes and getting your stuff wherever it is, getting it in front of you. Now, how do I preserve this collection? We're going to start right from there, okay? So we're doing this, obviously, because we want to preserve it. Not just for us and our generation, but for the future generations, right? Any actions that we can take, specifically with regards to storage and handling, those two areas, if I have to paint with a broad brush, those are the two areas that will work against us if we don't do anything else. Those two things alone, if we can make any small improvements in those areas, we will expand or extend that lifespan. So that's where we're going to focus. So what causes damage? Well, I mentioned storage and I mentioned handling and use. Within the storage, yeah, we're going to go quick. Ideally, so you've got your stuff in front of you, okay? Now think about where you got it from. And do you want to put it back there? So what we want to do is think about, let's choose, as a first step, the right storage environment or room. Okay, ideally, in my world, everything is kept in cold, dark storage. Well, that's not very good for, if you want to look at it. But cold, dark storage, that will extend its life. So, all right, we'll make concessions. Let's try to make sure that there's low light. Maybe there's no windows and the lights are only on when used. But ideally, this room is somewhere in your home, if that's where you're having it, that's cool and dry. And ideally, that cool and dry stays like that. Okay? We would like a fairly constant environment without a lot of fluctuations. So what that means is try to avoid crawl spaces and basements, unfinished attics, places where the air is stale and stagnant. And we do this for a few reasons I'll show you. But if you have it in these rooms, that's where we're likely to get the worst environment. So we've got our stuff in front of us. The very first thing we need to do before we can do anything else is decide where it's going to go. And we want to choose a room accordingly. When we choose that room, it's really hard to avoid some things. Okay, you might have windows, but if you don't, that's great. If you do, try not to store your stuff near them. If you have baseboard heaters, don't put your stuff near the baseboard heaters. If it's below a bathroom, try to maybe put your stuff in a farther corner away. Try to avoid sources of water. Okay, so thinking about these when we're trying to choose our storage room, because literally that's where it's going to live for the rest of its life, potentially, until you pass it on, right? So it is really important to try to give it this attention. Stable, avoid fluctuations, and if you have a choice between different rooms, pick the one that has the most stable environment, that's cool and dry. Ideally with good air circulation, if you can do that. I say keep the stuff off the floor 6 inches. If you can go more, that's great. And I find that that's a real stumbling block for a lot of people, because when we have shelving or we put it into a drawer or something, usually that maximizes our space, so it's right at the bottom. So maybe don't use the bottom shelf if you can, because we always get water from below if we're going to have flooding. Also, if the shelving is at the bottom, you can't clean under it. And we'll find that that's really important. Okay, so some of it you're going to have to look around, you're going to have to plan. And it's going to be based on how much material you have, right? I'm assuming you only have 1 box full. You'll have more. This is just to get you started. Okay, so you've picked your room. Also in your room, what's very important, again, I'm only picking out the highlights here. What's really important is that we really try to discourage pests and mold. And there are many things that cause damage, many. Matter of fact, the Canadian Conservation Institute in Ottawa, whose reference is at the back of your slides, they've come up with 10 agents of deterioration that are universally across the world accepted as the 10 things that cause damage to materials. They call them the 10 agents of deterioration. So I'm only talking about a few. But pests and mold are so important, as is storage and use, that I need to separate it out and tell you. So we need to actively discourage pests and mold. And that means a few things. It means we have to keep it dry. We have to keep it clean, right? We have to inspect it. Today we're going to look at how to do that. We need to kind of keep tabs on it. I suggest that you use these sticky traps that are called, see there's an image of one down in the corner. We call them glue boards or sticky traps. And they're not hard to find, and they're like $1 for 3. They're very cheap. And they aren't going to solve a problem, but they'll tell you if you have a problem, and they'll tell you with what, like what types of bugs. The pantry moth is not, we don't necessarily care about it, but we do care about clothes moth, and that's a different trap. I can give you that reference, but it looks like that, and it doesn't have the capsule. It has pheromone in it, but you don't add it. Okay, there is one that works really well. So you want one for moths and one for insects like silverfish. And this will tell you if you have a problem. If you find you do have a problem, don't hesitate to call someone who knows any of the Orkin or any of those people, okay? But you could probably solve the problem on your own. The other thing about insects is if insects are attracted or you find them, there's a good chance you have mold too, because they kind of go hand in hand. They like moisture. They like stale, dark, stagnant air and undisturbed spaces. They like a food source, so dust and dirt for sure. So they kind of like the same things. Also, insects and mold eat paper. They eat cellulose. It's a food source. So we're automatically feeding them just by having the stuff around. If we collected rocks, we wouldn't have this problem. But we collect paper and photographs and books, which is a food source. So the thing is, the reason I break it out is because these things, insects and mold, can totally destroy your collection without you knowing. That's the problem. Like if you might know that it's, you might be able to see that the book is slumping on the shelf and getting broken and distorted. But if there's mold inside that book or bugs inside that book, you can't really see it. So you have to keep tabs. So now that we've got all our stuff, we've picked our room, we're going to inspect and clean so that we aren't putting pests and mold back into that space. Okay? And just in case you're not convinced you need to do this, I'll send around some insect damage that if this was your item, it would be very sad. And I will send around the mold. I'm leaving it in the bag because it's a health risk. I don't want it to be, but you can see how soft and how there's not much left of it. And that's what mold can do to your paper and what insects can do to your paper. Is the plastic bag a safe temporary storage?
Yeah, just so the mold doesn't get on the other pieces
Yeah.
of the plastic.
If you find mold in your collection, or if it's dirt and you're not sure if it's mold, so the question is, can you put it in any plastic bag? If it's moldy, immediately you put on a dust mask, an N95, okay? Immediately, because it's very harmful to your health. It'll cause respiratory problems or exacerbate them if you have them already, and it can cause anaphylactic shock, and there are some that are fatal. I know 3 people in the field that are on permanent disability from dealing with moldy material. So the minute you find it, put on a dust mask, put on gloves if you can, and then seal, yes, put it in a bag, seal it, garbage bag, put the whole box in it if you have to, but seal it up and then call for help. You can't breathe it in, so put it in a bag. If it's moldy and still wet, when you put it in the bag, it's going to keep growing. If you don't put it in the bag, it'll spread to the rest of your collection and to your house, and it'll make you sick. So please put on a dust mask, an N95 ideally, and put on gloves, and then seal it. Tape it up and label it mold. Keep out.
I have a question in the chat here that asks, do trunks with mothballs in the past damage paper or articles?
Yeah, yes, they. So the question is, what about the use of mothballs? Please avoid the use of mothballs, because although they don't have, I say avoid them because there's too many things that can go wrong for the benefit. It's not a good balance. They're not detrimental necessarily to paper and photos and books unless they're in close proximity. However, they are very detrimental to, say, rubber, plastic, maybe some of our old dolls that have the hard, firm rubber legs. It'll melt. Also, mothballs, the vapor from mothballs is what deters pests, and it's heavier than air. So a lot of people just put them in the bottom. Well, then just the bottom of wherever you're putting them is what gets mothballs. And so the pests just avoid it. They just go above it. So they're not a very efficient or effective way. The very best way to get rid of pests and mold is to keep it dry and clean, air circulation, and disturbed every once in a while, and monitor. Regular cleaning and monitor the bottom 2 bullets.
Question about different kinds of pests. Like that's a silverfish.
Yep, it is.
Are there other kinds of pests?
There are.
Okay.
There are. Silverfish and cockroaches, they do the same damage. They eat the top of our stuff. There's wood borers, they're called, and they're like furniture beetle and powder post beetle, death watch beetle, little beetles that will bore into wood and furniture. Well, wood and furniture, if you think about it, a book, which is the paper's made from a tree, well, it's kind of like a loosely, not very dense tree. So, right? Because it's made of paper, and paper's made of, that paper, a lot of paper's made out of trees. So the wood borers will go in there, and they will eat that. And then there's dermestids, things like carpet beetle, the larvae from the carpet beetle, that will eat our natural specimens and some of our textiles. So we're looking at carpet beetle, furniture beetles. There are 2 different types of beetles. Okay? In furniture beetle and carpet beetle, that it's the larvae that do the damage. We're looking at silverfish and cockroaches. Book lice, which you probably won't find in your collection, but they'll eat the spine of your book, and they eat mold. So it's another reason why we want to get rid of mold. And clothes moths, which can eat the fabric on our books, but can also eat the other things, the ephemera that's in our collections. Because we do have ephemera and things like that, right? Does that answer the insect question? And other insects that this is, I'll just turn around the top half. But this photograph, this was displayed without a frame and glass, and there's little black dots all over it. We call those fly specks, but they're actually fly excrement. It's fly poop. And you'll see the little black dots all over it, fly specks. And so that's very common too. Now, although that doesn't damage our paper and our books, it looks terrible. And those little tiny dots are acidic. Okay. Also, if you find a fly or a spider and stuff, those might not eat our collections, but when they die, they look bad, they stain our material, and they attract other insects. So right? So it's a big cycle. And then the biggest insect I haven't talked about is mice, right? Undisturbed, damp paper they love. They don't eat it, but they do rip it up and make nests out of it. So really beware of mice as well, okay? They will find your collection and rip it to shreds. So you've got your stuff in front of you. You've got your storage room, some considerations. You're going to up your pest and mold monitoring, and you're going to clean stuff. Well, also now I want to remind you that when you go to actually inspect and tidy up and look at your collection and preserve your collection, I want to remind you that careful handling is really important. Handling is one of the biggest causes, besides storage, of damage to stuff. Books, they don't follow, the paper might become weak over time, but books themselves don't fall apart if you don't open and flip through them, right? So it's the handling that causes some problems. So we have to be very careful. So there's always a glove question. When do we use gloves? So my take is I always have clean, dry hands when I'm working with my stuff. No lotion, no hand sanitizer. Clean, dry hands. And then for the most part, I don't wear gloves. Because if you wear a glove and you're trying to turn the page of a book, sometimes you can cause more damage. There are nitrile gloves that are form-fitting, and that's a bit better. But I do wear gloves, particularly cotton gloves, because I find them more comfortable when I'm dealing with photographic materials, right, or metals, because our fingerprints will etch into the surface and leave a stain and leave our fingerprints on the surface. So what I sometimes do is I wear a glove on my one hand, but I don't wear it on the hand that I'm cleaning or writing, but I do have it on the hand that I'm handling. So if you have war medals or trophies, I would be wearing gloves because your fingers, the salt and stuff, it'll just etch right into that metal. And photographs have a metal component, silver halide. Okay, so photographs and metals. Also with photographs, make sure you try to touch them by the edges. Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I thought you. And I always tell people to, I mean, it sounds weird, but hold things by two hands. Part of that is for the health of the object, but also if I do this, okay, I'm not tempted to do this, right? I'm occupied. If your hands are occupied, you're not going to damage this with the free hand. You're not going to forget what you're doing, because I do that. Maybe you don't have. So use two hands, especially when it's heavy and fragile. Also, you're going to look at it and examine it and maybe pick it up with one hand. That's not the best. A teacup, it's old. Look at it first, but don't pick it up by the handle because it might be fragile now. A basket, don't pick it up by the handle. Reach under and lift it and support it. Furniture, we don't lift the table like this. We could pull the lid right off, right? The top right off. So the natural way to hold something might not be the safest for some of our older materials that have been handed down to us. So we've got our collection, we've got our storage room, we got our clean, dry hands or our gloves, depending on. And now we have to say, well, what's in our collection? Because we looked at that earlier. We've got a potpourri, we've got some ephemera, we've got photos, we've got books, we've got documents, we've got loose paper and bound paper, all sorts of things, right? Well, what do we need? We need to figure out what we need to store it. And it's really, really quite simple. A lot of our problems can be resolved and ameliorated if we put things in a box, okay? And the box, and so with archives, the majority of our archival stuff will go in a file folder and in an upright box like you have. We call these document boxes, and you've got a 5-inch document box, and the file folders within it are the right kind. If you have a fragile document, you can put it into a sleeve, okay? A plastic sleeve like this. So here's a fragile document because it's in pieces. Sorry. Okay? And I can, this is not great, but if I put it in the sleeve, or I can get this sleeve is welded on 3 sides. Oh, not my favorite, hard to get in and out. So either I buy them only open on 2 sides instead of 3, or I buy this and I cut that 3rd side off. Because when I have it like this with 2 sides, I can place my document in it and center it, put it into the space, and then static will sort of hold it in place. And now I can pass it to people, we can look at it as a family. So things that are very fragile or might get a lot of handling, put them in a sleeve, okay? And there are good sleeves and bad sleeves, I'll talk about in a minute. So if it's a regular size, legal sized or smaller, photograph or document or a negative or any of that stuff, we're going to put it in a file folder and in a box. If it's big, we're going to unfold it or unroll it and put it in a larger box. You can get flat boxes that look like these, but they're maybe the size of newspaper, right? And they're about this high. So we lay them flat. We open them and lay them flat. We open them because if you open it to look at it and then close it, and then someone else opens it and closes it, and eventually every time we look at it, we open it, close it, it's going to fail along the folds. So open it once and leave it open. Store it in oversized. Books, scrapbooks, photo albums, etc. If it's really healthy, meaning the boards are in good condition, the front and back cover are in good condition, and the book is stable, it can go on your shelf vertically as long as it's got support. My preference for all of those, even if they're not fragile, is to lay them horizontally. And I like to put them in a box or stack maybe 2 or 3 tops, okay, and stack them horizontally because they support themselves better and they can't do any damage that way. Yes?
We have a couple questions in the chat here. One is asking if there are any risks to storing documents in plastic sleeves. And the second question is if you recommend a particular type of plastic sleeve and where you can order them online.
Okay, so the questions are about plastic sleeves and documents and photos. Okay, so if you're going to get a plastic sleeve, okay, which I recommend you buy, I would order them from Carmaclean because they have a variety of them, okay? And they come in various thicknesses. The sample that the little ones you have, that's 3 mil, it's called, and that's a good thickness. So I recommend 3 millimeter, and ideally it should be polypropylene or polyester. It can also be polyethylene. The very best is polyester. Another name for that is Mylar. Mylar is a brand name, but it's polyester, okay? And it's inert and it will not change or degrade your items. The only risk to storing, there's 2 risks that come to my mind about storing things in sleeves, is if people decide to take it out and put it in. Physically, that's bad because it's very, they get staticky and it's difficult to, it's doable, but it's difficult to take them out. So you've got to be really careful. So put something in a sleeve that's fragile and don't let people take it out. The second risk is if it's at all damp, like if it's not perfectly dry, when you put it in the sleeve, it will get moldy. So make sure everything's dry. Don't do it on a rainy day outside. Make sure the item's perfectly dry. And the last thing which is, it should be dry. So I don't consider that to be a very good risk because you're the custodians and you're going to make sure it's dry. And the third thing that's iffy is if you have a flood, it will protect them. But if the flood goes too far and water gets in, then you have to get it out to dry it. And that can be risky. But it really has to get in the box, in the folder, and in the sleeve for it to be a problem. So I highly recommend, these are called L welds because they're welded like an L. Yeah, L weld I like. Or welded on one side is also okay. And they're sold at Carmaclean. And there's brand names like Print File and things like that that have holes for binders. Well, that's fine, provided you store the binder flat. If you store the binder upright, vertically, the page's plastic slumps. It's not strong enough. You have to avoid PVC, which is polyvinyl chloride. So this is a sleeve for slides, and it's PVC plastic, and this is very bad and it will harm your material. And once you see it and feel it, I think you'll recognize it in the future. Could you pass that around? So you don't want PVC. Yep. The question is photographs in an album. Do you remove them or not? Okay. So photographs in an album. If the album is those pages that you pull back and then the photograph sticks. We called them magnetic. They're not, but when I was young, we called them magnetic pages. When you peel it back, if it peels back safely, fine. And if it comes off safely, then fine, take it off. But if it gives you any grief, don't do it. If it's really important to you, find someone who can do it for you, because it would take solvents. If it's in a photo album like this, where it's this black cardboard pages, okay, not my favorite. This black cardboard is causing some damage, it's very acidic. So I would take them out, and these ones, I'm lucky, they just fall out, okay? But when they do fall out, sometimes, and if they don't fall out, I cut them out sometimes. I get them out of the book because flipping and turning them is not great. So even if it has the black on the back, then put it in a sleeve or a file folder in your box, okay? So, but don't try to take off the tape. This has tape on it. Just leave it there. If it falls off, great. But if you try to take it off, there's a good chance you'll risk taking it off. Now, if you had the previous lecture, and if you can watch it online, talks about what you store and what you keep and things like that. Well, with our photo album, if we're going to take it apart, we might want to think about, is it necessary to keep track of what was on what page in what order? Like sometimes there's writing and stuff. So I take picture with my phone. If you can photocopy it at work maybe, then you know what order it went and you know any of the writing. So if you look at it and the photographs look okay, then just leave them there. But if they're falling apart or falling out or turning yellow, then try to take them out if safe to do so. And if it's not safe, just leave it and get help if they're of value.
And another question from the chat is someone says they have a collection of old newspaper clippings. Should each of them be stored individually in a separate sleeve?
Okay, so newspaper clippings and newspaper pages. Clippings, a little bit worse than, they're very acidic. They have the pH of about orange juice. Yeah, it's about 4.5. And so it's not great. And it can adversely affect your other materials. So this piece was against a piece of newspaper, okay? So that's what color it should be versus what color it is, okay? And that's because this was against a piece of newspaper and it transferred its acids. Okay, you don't want to do that. So newspaper clippings, like our documents, go in file folders and in a box, okay? If you have a lot of newspaper clippings, group them. Take them, like if you have a couple of letters, 5 or 6 letters, and a newspaper, one clipping, take it out, put all your clippings together in the same file folder. And that's all you have to do as long as they're together. And then they're separated by a file folder. Okay, that's fine if you have quite a few. Maybe a whole box full. You've got newspapers and bigger clippings, they go in the whole box. But if you have 1 or 2 newspaper clippings in amongst your letters or your correspondence or your important documents, that item should go in a sleeve. Okay, so we put our fragile thing in here to protect it, but we could also put our bad thing in here to prevent it from hurting everything else. Okay, so if you have 1 or 2, put them in a sleeve. The sleeves aren't cheap though. Okay, so put them in. But if you have a whole bunch of newspaper clippings and 1 letter, put the 1 letter in here. The idea is prevent that transfer of acid, okay? Whether it's the good one you're blocking or the bad ones you're blocking, and try to group them together. Okay. So when we go to buy, to think about, okay, we've got our stuff, we lay it out, we go, okay, I've got photographs, I've got paper, it's all going in, these are all legal sized or smaller. I need a whole bunch of file folders and I need a whole bunch of boxes and I need some sleeves. Those are the 3 things I need. Sleeves, a few, file folders, and boxes. That's going to take care of most of our stuff. Maybe we have a few oversized things. We need some oversized folders and maybe 1 or 2 oversized boxes, like a newspaper box, again, in that catalog. Okay? So we got that. Now, when we're picking them, there's a thing called the PAT. You'll see it referenced in your catalog and online. That's the photo activity test. All you need to know is in the write-up about your product, if your photograph's going in there, it has to say passed PAT. Otherwise, it's got components that are harmful to your photographic materials, your negatives, your slides, your photos. Okay, so make sure it says that. The other thing is, and this is my caution about local places, sometimes they don't always know the actual components of the materials. They'll say, but it's acid-free. Okay, well, acid-free has no governing body. I can call myself acid-free. Depends what I ate for breakfast. But and also material, like your boxes, when we buy them, they're acid-free. And when they're manufactured, they're acid-free. Sometimes by the time we get them, they're not. They've absorbed so much acid from around them, they're not acid-free anymore. So don't go by just the word acid-free. Make sure it says that it's buffered 8.5, or buffered with 3% calcium carbonate. Make sure it says lignin-free, which is a component in trees. And make sure it tells you more about what's in it. If it's plastic, you want to see the words polyester and polypropylene. Don't use glassine. Okay, if you have stuff in glassine, you're going to get rid of it. And don't use color file folders. Oh, probably the only thing I didn't bring. It's
It's all what we get when you put postage stamps in.
old school envelopes that had a window. They had that window was a little bit cloudy and kind of crinkly, and it was glassine. They're like a foggy paper. It's a cross between it's paper, but it looks like frosted paper. Yes.
No, it was glassine.
No, that's plastic. But again, we'll talk about that. I would take them out. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. So then you've got your plastics and your papers, and then you need a box, these ones, okay? And make sure the box fits. If you have a whole bunch of photographs and they're all around this big, well then, roughly 4 by 6, 5 by 7, then get a 5 by 7 box and sleeves and put them in the right size box. If you put them in this size box, it's fine, but they're going to rattle around a bit, and that can cause problems. If you have a few, that's fine. But if you have a good stack of them, really kind of pay attention. And I usually recommend getting legal-sized file folders and boxes, because then your legal size and your letter goes in them. These are letter sized, so don't fold legal-sized documents and put them in there, okay?
Sorry, one more question in the chat here that asks, what is the best way to store photo negatives?
Exactly the same way. How do you store negatives? Exactly the same way we store photographs, and we're going to run through that, but they go in a sleeve. I like a plastic sleeve because I can see through it as long as it's polyester or polypropylene. There are paper sleeves that are also okay. Negatives we don't look at that often, but keeping in mind if it's not plastic, you have to handle it to look at it. So seeing through it is kind of nice. All right, so you've decided you need file folders, boxes, some sleeves, folders, boxes, some oversized stuff, this much, okay? And now I'm going to start my collection. I'm going to process, or what I call upgrade. I'm going to preserve my collection. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove staples and paper clips and bulldog clips, all of those things that can rust and cause problems, can dent, can tear, can hinder when you want to go and look through something. Because remember I said storage is bad, but also use and handling is a problem. We want to make sure that we can remove the damaging attachments. And then don't use them in the future. If you come across something, oh, I need to keep these together, just take a soft pencil and write in the corner, right? 1 of 2, 2 of 2. All right, I'm going to put you to work pretty soon. So once you've removed all your attachments, like your fasteners and stuff, you also have to take, if it's in a plastic sleeve like your negatives, you don't know the quality of that sleeve unless you bought it. I'm of the when in doubt, throw it out. Okay? Recycle it in soft plastics. But take stuff out of sleeves that you haven't purchased because you may not know the quality and it's not worth the risk. Okay? So take them out. Take out things in manila envelopes. Take it out. Get rid of that envelope. That's like cardboard, right? So get rid of all that stuff that's extraneous to your information and to your collection. You don't need it. You're trying to sort of standardize what things look like. Okay, so now you'll have your unsleeved photos, negatives, maybe some slides, right? maybe some slides, and you'll have your documents, and you might have an envelope that you want to keep, that's fine, but take the letter out and unfold it and put it with the document. I would put the envelope in a sleeve, because if you don't, sometimes the glue stains things, okay? So you've got that. Now, what you need to do, okay, so we're ready. We've ordered our supplies. We've got our room. It's dry, it's clean. We're gonna get ready to put our stuff in it. The first thing we do is remove all those damaging attachments, get everything out. Now we're going to inspect for pests and mold and clean. Okay, when I say clean, everything gets brushed. And we do this because everything we brush, it gives us a chance to lay our eyes on it. Is there pests? Is there mold? No. But it also removes the dust and dirt. And dust and dirt is acidic, abrasive, attracts moisture, attracts other insects, and can obscure the information. So what I'd like you to do, well, we're going to work with the photograph first. I would a brush in one hand and a glove on the other. Wear one glove. If you want to wear two gloves, you certainly can. Okay, so we're going to get our photograph out. Say the photograph on the top. I'm going to let you do the other photograph at your leisure. But take out the photograph and handle it by the edges, remember? And one hand, if not both, have a glove on it. And you're going to handle it by the edges. Now, in front of you, there's a piece of paper. Okay, this is a plain piece of white paper, and it's called Permalife. I like to buy this. If you hold it up to the light, you can see it's called Permalife. This is a good quality paper, and you can use it to interleaf if you don't have sleeves. Okay, when we took our letter out of our envelope, we could put this between them. Okay, if you don't. So what I want you to do is take this piece of paper and put it in front of you, and what we're going to do is we're going to clean on the paper. Nice clean white surface. So put the photograph in the middle. Now you're going to carefully, okay, seeing in our brush, we're going to brush a little bit of one corner, and then you can use your gloved finger to hold it down you want to brush the corner before you push down, okay? Yeah.
Anything particular about the brush that we need to keep in mind?
Ideally soft, but if it's super soft like a makeup, it's not going to do anything. So firm but not bristly. These are a bit bristly, but that's okay. Dry and clean. Has to be dry, has to be clean.
So anything you can find like Home Depot?
Absolutely, yeah. Karma Clean has some nice ones. You know, even the Michaels and places like that, these are good. Wider ones for bigger documents, tinier ones for smaller things. So if you brush away from you, I like to brush away from me, but just one corner, then I hold it steady with the corner that I brush, and I'm pushing down, because I don't want to put my finger on the dirt, right? So I brush the corner lightly, and then I hold it down with my gloved finger. Oh. Now I'm brushing away from me, okay? So holding it down and brushing away from me. And you're gonna do the front, okay? Then you're gonna flip it over on the other side of the white paper. Like you're gonna move it on the paper so that you aren't putting it back down onto dirty paper.
Wow. Out of curiosity, the black dots that we're finding here?
They're not mold. I would not do that to you.
No, it's fire.
A fly specks? No, mine's dirt. It's my,
wow.
Yeah. So you'll notice that they're quite dirty. That's good. You're good. So if you brush both sides, now with your ungloved hand, feel the surface. Just feel it and see if it's still gritty or dirty. Does it feel dirty, gritty? Yeah. Okay. Now in front of you, the other thing you have is a makeup sponge. Okay? If you look, you get a makeup sponge. Yeah. So I find that the dollar store ones are the best. You get a whole bag. They're cheap, cheap, cheap. But when you buy them, they have a coating. Okay? So buy them, put them in warm soapy water, and then rinse them and soak them in just clean warm water overnight. Okay, and then rinse them really well and lay them out on the counter to dry fully, because they have like a bit of something in them, like a starch or something, and you want to get rid of that. So warm water, soak them overnight, next day squish them out, let them dry. Now take your sponge, and when you're using your sponge, okay, you're going to do the same thing, but you're going to go slower with the sponge, because the sponge can be pretty aggressive. You're going to go slower with the sponge, and you're going to kind of rock your hand, and you're not going to go back and forth. Okay? Okay, so when you do that with your sponge on the front and the back, now look at your sponge. Yeah, go ahead.
Not
Yeah.
back and forth.
You can go towards you if you want, just don't go back and forth. Because you go back and forth, it'll bunch up, right? Now, is your sponge dirty?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you can cut off, like with scissors, I cut my sponges and I shape them sometimes to get into places. But I also, frankly, I wash them. So I would take that one, I would move it, I would use a clean area. Once it's dirty, I'd put it aside, I'd grab another one. And I'd do that. And at the end of the day, I wash them. Warm soapy water, smush, 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 okay? And reuse them. And you might notice some of yours are reused. So you can see how clean that is. Now, once it's clean and you've sponged it, feel it again. How does it feel now? Is it any better? And if it's still a bit gritty, you might want to give it a light brush, but that's all you need to do for that. It's extra dirty. Now take that photograph with your gloved hand, holding it by the edge, and slowly insert it carefully into the small sleeve. Now these sleeves are welded on 3 sides, which is not my favorite, and so I think you'll see why they're hard to get in. You should have 2 in your container, and if you don't, let me know. In your little box. Okay, so yeah, you want to make sure, that's why you want to use the glove, because you do end up handling them quite a bit. But I find that the sleeve, I can't get a grip on it with the sleeve, with the glove, so I try to use one hand. But once you've cleaned it off, front and back, and then given it a bit of brush, after the sponge I sometimes brush it again, and then I put it in the sleeve. Now once it's in the sleeve, it can go in the file folder and in the box. Do you feel like that's a pretty easy way? Now when you've noticed your brush and your sponge are pretty dirty, look at your white paper, it's probably very dirty. That's why I set out white paper. I use just any kind of clean white paper so I can also see. Now I would see if I had bugs, I would see them, right?
They're big enough to see is what you're saying.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They're definitely big enough to see.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So now that you've got it in the sleeve and it's nice and clean, you put it in a file folder. If you have a box, many that size, you would get a bunch of those sleeves and you would get a box to fit. If you have 1 or 2, it can go into the file folder with your paper documents, just like that. Yeah. Now, you have 2 photos. You can do the other one if you want. 2 photos and 2 sleeves. But if you had a lot of photos, you wouldn't necessarily, if they're really healthy, you might not want to put them all in sleeves, but maybe you do. If you have the resources, that's the best. One of the reasons, well, for several reasons, one of them is that you can then handle it and you can show people, they can pass it around, you can look at it, you can flip it over and see the back in case there's writing. So the sleeves are really good for that. The other thing is if these things get wet, if they're not in sleeves, they're wet, they could stick to each other. See what happens if you don't separate your photos, okay, and they get wet, they're never coming apart. Now, I can do just about anything, but I can't get these apart without wrecking one of them.
Right.
Yeah, either the top one or the bottom one gets wrecked. So sleeving them is a great idea for photographs. And if you want to digitize them or scan them, you can do it right through the sleeve, which is great because then nobody's handling it, okay? So if you're done that, what I'd like to do, I got till 11:30, right?
Oh yeah. No, I was just gonna ask a question from the chat.
Do it.
Okay. There's a question if you have any other companies that you recommend for archival supplies other than Karma Clean, particularly in the US.
Oh, yeah. So in the US, if you have access to them, there's a few companies. I ordered from Hollinger Corporation. Hollinger, Hollinger, Hollinger Corporation. And they're the company that invented this box, if you will. So many people, we call it a document box, but many people still call it a Hollinger. Okay? Hollinger, they make all this stuff. The other one is University Products, is an American company. And then more specialized supplies and products and tools is a place called Talas, Talas. And they're in New York, and they're more specialized brushes and tools and a little higher end. All right, so we want, and there's in your handout, you've got a little more instruction about the brushing and the cleaning. Now, what I want to do is brush and sponge the book. Okay, now it's a little bit different. So we're going to use that piece of paper again, okay? And we're going to have one gloved hand, but if you'd like to have no gloves on, you can in this case. But again, these are my books, so please be careful, and not all of them are in perfect condition by any means. If they're your books, what you're going to do is pick it up and very carefully maybe set it on edge over the white paper like this, and open it just a bit and lightly tap it. Okay? If it's strong and healthy, just go like that, lightly, just lightly tap it.
Seriously, did you put the dirt in there? No, really, like, holy cow.
I know. Some of them are so dirty.
It's not a comment on you, but it's just like.
Yeah. You should see that's my book, you should see my house. My dad says, just sprinkle seeds. No sense wiping up all that dirt. So carefully, a little bit too aggressive, some of those. Now that's going to get rid of some of the dirt, but it's also, if you have any bugs, they're going to fall out. All right. So now you don't want to set it, you're going to set it down flat, and you're going to set it down flat, not onto dirty stuff. So set that dirt aside carefully, or maybe flip the piece of paper over, or fold it in half maybe, and trap that dirt in there. Yeah, or just, it's clean dirt. Now, we're gonna do two things with this, and I just wanna walk you through it briefly. We're gonna to the front and the back. We're gonna open up the book very carefully and maybe support it if we have to, but what we do is this edge right here is called the gutter, where the information meets right in there. It's called the gutter. So what we're going to do is we're going to carefully brush the gutter, okay, on the very first page, and then maybe one or two pages as well. The first few pages, we're going to brush the gutter. If you want to brush the whole page after that, you can. But you'll see that in the gutter is where the dirt goes. And what happens is that dirt becomes very aggressive and abrasive. And sometimes the book doesn't want to close, and if it does, it breaks to accommodate for that dirt. And then opening and closing the book with that dirt in there can cause it to break along that edge, and the covers can break. So the first few pages, be really careful you don't push your brush right through. And the last few pages, you're going to do the same thing to the last few pages.
Why only not the one?
Well, you can do because I run out of room. Because usually that's where the bulk of the paper goes, or the bulk of the dust and dirt, because it's not very tight. Okay, the joint. The rest of that's called the rest of the words in the paper is called a text block, and it's pretty tight, right? But a couple of 2 or 3 pages at the beginning and the end, they're quite loose, and there's not a tight bind, so the dust and dirt can get in there. That's why. If you think it's still dirty, you keep going, but you'll find a spot where it's no longer dirty. You'll go, oh, okay. But that's where the bulk of it goes. Yeah, okay. Once you're done that front and back, we have one final approach. So we're going to pick up the book with either our clean, dry hands or with the glove, okay? Now we're going to clamp the book closed. I usually hold it like this, but I'm clamping it, and I'm going to brush this edge. And then I'm going to turn it, and I'm going to brush, but you got to clamp it tight, because if you don't, you're going to push the dirt and the bristles right inside. So clamp it, okay? Clamp it and then brush that. That's called the foredge, the head, and the tail of the text block. So close it tight and brush that. Now sometimes, like our books often sit on the shelf like this, so that top edge often gets even dirtier. Try clamping it and then try your sponge and see if that makes any difference, just on that top edge. Because sometimes that top edge gets a little bit dirty. So once you've brushed the first few inside, maybe a bit more, then you've clamped it, you've done the outside edges, maybe with a brush, maybe with a sponge. right? Then you can set it down. If you want to brush off the cover a bit, you can. You're great. Now, personally, if it's strong and healthy, like all the books, some of the books you have are a little bit damaged, those can be, they can live on there vertically as long as they have support. But if they're damaged, if one of the book boards is falling off, a cover is loose or something like that, then I would store it horizontally. Okay? Yeah.
Static cloths, I can't remember what they're called, the dust cloths.
Yeah. Look at
Yes, winter time, yeah.
what I don't like about them is I can't control it. Like they're big and floppy, right? And so if some of these are quite fragile and the pages are loose, and if I went like that with the brush, it's okay for the tops and the outside maybe. But inside, there's too many, those things, if I think about them as having these octopus arms, right? That are gonna catch a page and rip it sure as heck, right? But they themselves aren't. But don't use any other, don't use moisture, don't use any other, like, especially like hand wipes or anything like that. All of those have residues and stuff you don't want. You don't want to introduce moisture at all because you'll make mud, right? Like if anything we just did was water based or had any moisture, we would have made mud and that would have smeared right in there, right? Okay? Yes?
When you say stack horizontally,
Yes.
is there a maximum? Say
Yeah.
10 books or?
Yeah, I like 2 or 3 the most. And unless they're in boxes, you could put 2 in a box and then go with boxes could be stored horizontally. Make sure that the smallest one is on the top, not the bottom. You don't want it. And the heaviest ones are on the bottom. But like I say, unless they're damaged, the other thing you can do with something that's loose, a board or something like that, you can tie it. You can tie the book up with twill tape, like a present, like the ribbon on a present. This is just twill tape, cotton, like it's just a cotton bias tape. We call it twill tape, but it's bias tape. And it's just cotton. It comes in different widths. And you just wrap it like you would the ribbon on a thing and tie it up and set that on your shelf. Because then when you look at it, you're going to go, oh, something's wrong, right? Or anybody that go to get it and they're going to go, oh, something's wrong, I have to be careful. So that's a nice way to signify that you can't just pick it up and flip through it if you don't put it in a box, right? Now, I've also, at the back, I don't think we copied them, did we? There's the Canadian Conservation Institute has notes, and we've tried, maybe something called, I don't know if they're at the back, but it's how to make these enclosures, like how to make a box. And very good and simple instructions for that. Maybe we can put that on the website or on the email afterwards, okay? Also at the back of the room, there's some handouts that, oh, we do have, that one's different. That one, okay, so that one, there's another 1-page handout. So that's the CCI notes that would be great to copy. Yeah, take a look. Yeah, we'll get copies. But the other thing I have is this 1-page document that's about framing. And what it is read, if you're going to get framing done, read it over. There's enough to hand out. Read it over so that you know what to take to your framer so that they don't upsell you. Keep it simple. So then what I want to say is after you've done that, okay, you've cleaned everything, you've brushed everything. Everything gets brushed. Negatives, slides, everything. Make sure your brush is clean and dry. Some of the things are going to get sponged, but not everything. Just if it's got a bit more dirt, get sponged. Now you're going to finally protect it. You're going to give it a house, a place to live for most of its life, right? You're going to put it in a sleeve. You're going to put it in a file folder and in a box, okay? A box, if it's the records and the file folders are slumping, you want to put some stuff in there to pad it out so that it's not... so that it's nice and tight. What you want is, you want to be able to put your hand down with an open hand and touch the thing. But if you can put a fist down, it's too loose. And if you can't get your hand down, it's too tight.
So 2 questions. First one is, how should old posters be stored?
Flat.
Okay.
Framing is a great, if it's done properly, without a lot of extra things like cardboards and backings and stuff. If it's just kept simple with some good quality matting and backing, that's it. Framing is a great storage way too, okay? Now in that, I think it talks about glass and UV glass. I never put glass on. I always put UV plexi. Yeah, because it's come a long way. It used to be that it scratched and it was green, you could tell. Nowadays, it's come so far that you can't tell the difference, and it's actually better. And it's lighter and it doesn't break. So I always use plexi. If you can't afford to frame something because it's too big, then you can buy sleeves like this, like our Mylar sleeves, and you can buy folders that are big, that will accommodate a poster. And if it's slightly curled and you put it into a sleeve, the sleeve will actually kind of keep it flat. And that will help. And then what I do is, there's a product called Coroplast, and it's a corrugated plastic. Do I have a sample? And you could buy it at the hardware store. I probably have a sample. And I make a folder out of it. I just take two big pieces and I tape it down one edge. And then I have a folder. And you can put oversized posters and things like that into this oversized folder. You can use mat board, like, just imagine, like, that would be fine. You could take mat board, two pieces of big mat board, and tape it down one side to make a folder. And that's good for maps or certificates that often don't fit in the box. Ideally, everything is unrolled and unfolded.
Second question here is, what is a recommended method to store or display embroidered silk or other textiles?
Yeah. Okay. Embroidery, it's interesting, like cross stitch or embroidery and things like that. Ideally, the best way to display it and to store it is framed, but properly stretched, or we call mounted. What you don't want is to give it to someone and they'll say, yes, we mount it, and then you pick out a mount, and then you check later and they've wrapped it around a piece of cardboard or foam core and they've taped it to the back. So you don't want that. There are two ways. The one that takes the longest but is the best one is you take your item and you put it onto a piece of foam core. Okay, and there are good and bad quality foam cores, but you know what foam core is, right? Okay, so you put it on a piece of foam core and you pull the edge over, and then you take stainless steel pins and you pin it into the foam core all the way around. And then you adjust and pull it tight, put a pin. Oh, loosen this one off, it's too tight. You don't tape it, you pin it with stainless steel pins because those won't corrode. Then you frame it with a window mat. You have to keep the glass or the plexi off the surface. If the glass on the front touches the item, whether it's a textile or a stitchery or anything like that, you will get mold or transfer. So make sure there's a window mat, or sometimes you'll get a spacer, like a floater frame. I think they call them shadow boxes, as long as the glazing is kept away. But don't let them pull it around to the back and tape it. The other method, if you don't like that, is to pull it around to the back. And once you have your object pulled around to the back, you can sew this to this. Right? Like you take a stitch here and here and here, so that if you cut it, you could undo it, right? So it's not glued, or my thing with the pins or the sewing, it's not glued or taped. Because gluing and taping will discolor, become brittle, it will adversely affect your item.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
How do you properly dry a document? Say if you got to your parents' basement.
Yeah.
I know it's slightly
Damp.
Yeah. What's the proper way of drying it?
Yeah. Now, my first thing is make sure it's not moldy. Okay. By like smelling it and looking at it and touching it, but with a dust mask. If you think it's moldy at all, put an N95 dust mask on. Then I go out, if it's nice out, I go outside. But if not, you can dry things by laying them out on the table. Literally. Just the air circulation, they will dry in no time. Make sure that if you overlap them, because you might have a whole bunch, you can overlap them, then you could flip them and, expose more to the air. Okay? Anything that gets wet needs to dry, but the more surface area, the better. So if I'm drying a wet book, I wouldn't necessarily do this, but I might do this. And I might fan it out and put some paper towel in it. More air circulation. If my doll got wet and her body and her clothing, I would put her up on blocks and I would put a fan on it. and that would give me lots of air circulation. If a garment or a baby's christening gown got wet, I would stuff it out with something like newsprint or tulle, you know, or something cheeseclothy, or tulle is nice, kind of rigid. Stuff it out so that there's lots of air, and then put a fan on it. Things like that need to be dried quickly so they don't bleed.
So, like a metal drying rack, like you use in cooking.
Yeah,
I mean, like
sure.
that would be a good
Yeah.
way, because there's certain.
Absolutely. I would put like a towel or something, a little, like as long as that, if there was any risk of that grid or the rack forming or embossing or affecting the physical planarity of the item. So I might put, like say, a towel or maybe something even more rigid, like a piece of blotting paper. Right. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So
I meant to,
I have
sure.
a satin moonwood, which is what 1 month dress my mom had made for us.
Okay.
What's the best way perhaps to preserve it, or just keep it until we let the next baby wear it?
Okay, so the question is, and I've forgotten to repeat other questions, is a little silk baby's dress. The best way to preserve that is, and I could ask you as a test, but the first thing you'll do is clean it, brush it.
Okay.
And then what I would do is I take nylon window screening. It's very flexible, right? And I put it down on top, hold it down, and I vacuum through the window screening. So nothing gets sucked up into the vacuum. And you'll be surprised, it works really well. But you have to hold down the screening. Sometimes I have to put books around it, or, you know, soup cans or whatever around the window screening. And then you vacuum through the window screen, maybe turn the dress over, do it. But take your time, you'll get a lot of dust and dirt, but you won't get any buttons or anything like that. Then once you do that, the best way is to store it, but pad it out with, take tissue and make like snakes or sausages out of it, and pad out the folds. So wherever there's a fold in like a crease here or here, then that's where it's going to be most fragile. So even if you laid the dress flat like this, and you like say I'm the dress, I would pad here, and I might put some padding in the arms and then lay them like this, you know, as long as there's not, and I wouldn't put anything on top. If you flatten me out, then that's, and then you try to wear me, I could break, and the silk especially could break or fail along the folds, right? Like any of the folds or joints to give it a bit of structure, sort of like a child, I guess, and then in a box, absolutely. And I would sometimes take an old clean bed sheet. I don't throw them away, cut them up. I put the box down like a big document box or newspaper box, and I put the bed sheet down, then I put the item in, and then I just lay the bed sheet like that, but don't seal it up. The bed sheet can absorb any moisture, dust, and dirt, and then I put the lid on. Any of our stuff's going in file folders and boxes, so remember that temperature and humidity I talked about and stuff? Well, that's all buffered again, because we've picked a room that's pretty stable. Now we put things in boxes, so even inside our box, it's even better. Right?
I may have missed this. No Rubbermaid container, or
yeah, you can do a Rubbermaid container. I think in the boxes I said make sure that there's no like holes for handles and things like that. The Rubbermaid containers, I like them, and I like the clear ones so I can see what's in it.
Exactly.
Yeah, but just make the big caution is make sure the stuff is dry. If it's not dry when it goes in, it'll mold. Yeah, and then don't stack the stuff in it. Stack the containers for sure. And you can get textile boxes, but they're expensive. I have the Rubbermaid containers for sure. All of that stuff protects us and then buffers the environment, but it also keeps out dust and dirt, keeps out insects, and deters mildew and mold as well. So putting things in a file folder box, or you know, a bed sheet in a box or whatever, like something to hold it, the item, paper, book, whatever, and then something to hold the items. Right, in a box, in a drawer. But if it's going to be a drawer, make sure it's not a bottom drawer, that type of thing.
Two-part
Yes.
question. One, the document is full folded.
Yes.
So there are creases
Yeah.
and corners are tucked back. Can
Yeah.
you attempt to unfold those things and press out before you store in a sleeve? Because it looks very brittle.
Yeah. So the question is, if you have a document that's brittle and it's got folding, well, you have to read it. So if you're really worried about it, you can take it to someone else. Take it to me or someone like me, and we will introduce moisture that will relax the fibers and allow it to open. If you don't want to and you think that it can do it, then slowly lift it up and watch the fold and see if it's getting cracks or if it's separating, and if it is, stop. But you might be able to slowly and gently do it. Yeah, and then once it's open, don't push it down and, you know, let it sit there for a bit, maybe a day. I hate to say it, sometimes I put them in the bathroom when I'm showering and then take them out. I don't put them in the shower with me, but I put them in the, and then when I come out of the shower, they open a little easier, but make sure again they're dry. But then they open a bit easier, right? And then once they're open, then you can like let them dry. Then if they're starting to, I turn them upside down so they curve down. And then I put them in a sleeve. And if there's a corner that's folded, I would put it in a sleeve. I would undo it if I could and put it in a sleeve. And if it broke, don't go too far. Don't fold it back. Just open it enough that you can read it, because putting it in the sleeve, even if it's still sort of will flatten it. And so even if the corner falls off, you can still do this. This sleeve is old and it's lost its oomph. But even if the corner falls off, you can put it in the sleeve and the static will keep it in place so you don't lose any bits. Okay? But yeah, it's like the rolled photos and things like that. Sometimes you need a bit of moisture, but just go at it gently. Yeah. Scanning, the question is for scanning photos or for scanning anything, how's the proper way to handle them? Yes. Ideally, when you're digitizing something, you actually photo it. So you photograph it, you don't scan it. That's the ideal way. Okay? Like a digital center won't put it in a scanner. They set it on a bed and they take digital images of it. Right? They don't actually, and so, same with books. When they digitize a book, they turn a page, take a picture, turn it. So they don't actually scan it. If you have to scan it, ideally put it in a sleeve to protect it and then scan it. Make sure the sleeve is clean and the object is brushed before you do that. Don't let someone else do it. Don't give all your precious memories to the company that will scan your precious memories. Go to a place where you can do it, like here, right? You do it. Brush the bed off. If you're going to wipe the bed or clean it, make sure it's really dry. And don't use a feed scanner. You don't want it to go through it. You want it to be a flat bed where you lift it up, put your item down, put the thing, and then scan it. And do a lot of testing first and then scan once and put it away. But ideally, like say a photograph of it, a digital image is the kind of what we expect when we digitize something.
And then hands.
Well, if it's in a sleeve, you're okay.
Gloves or no
Right.
gloves?
I would not wear gloves unless it's a photo. If it's a photograph, I would touch it by the corners and I would use gloves. And in that case, I would have gloves on both hands. But watch your gloves don't get dirty, because if you're pushing buttons and stuff, then for sure they can get dirty and they need to be swapped out. Okay? This is it in a nutshell, the basics, very basics. And like I said, each one of those is actually very important. That's why there are so many more I could add and convolute things, but really it's about your storage room. Get your supplies together, get your stuff together, brush it, because you're investigating, you're looking for mold and insects and stuff like that, and then you're putting it into something to protect it. And don't forget about it. Go back and look at it, enjoy it. For starters, you did all that work, enjoy it, but also that allows you to keep monitoring and other things. And if you're going to add to it with your own stuff, make sure you print it on good quality paper. You know, laser printers are better than inkjets for longevity, stuff like that. So, you know, if you're going to add to it, same with photographs. Right.
Yeah, so spend some time wandering around the museum. Check out our exhibitions if you haven't already. Check them out. And we hope to see you again in a future workshop. Thank you for coming. And
Thank you. Thank you for sharing your Sunday morning with me.